She had no husband, no name, and no place to go. The woman stumbled through the mud-choked crossroads of Blackthorn village as winter twilight dimmed to darkness, her fate hanging by a thread as thin as her rain-soaked cloak. With each painful step, she moved deeper into a world that had already decided to reject her before she spoke a single word. The rain fell in cold, relentless sheets, turning the village square into a churning mire of mud and filth. Thatched roofs sagged under the deluge, water streaming from their edges like tears. Smoke from cook fires leaked from chimney holes, only to be beaten back by the wind. A single torch sputtered near the village well, casting more shadows than light. She moved through this dismal tableau like a ghost. Her gown, once fine linen, hung in tatters below her knees, the hem black with mud and torn where it had caught on brambles during her flight. A crude woolen cloak, stolen from a washing line 2 villages back, provided little warmth against the biting chill. Her boots were cracked and worn, one sole flapping with each step, inviting the cold mud between her toes. From the shadows of doorways, villagers watched her pass with narrowed eyes and whispered warnings. A mother yanked her curious child back inside. An old man spat in the mud as she passed. She kept her face tilted downward, allowing tangled strands of dark hair to conceal the purple bruise blooming across her cheekbone and the split in her lower lip. The inn stood at the village centre, its windows glowing with promised warmth. Golden light spilled onto the muddy street, a cruel invitation. She paused before the door, gathering what little courage remained within her hollowed chest, then pushed inside. Conversation died. Faces turned, eyes judged. "I seek shelter," she whispered, her voice cracked from disuse. "I can work, I can clean, or—" "We don't take vagrants." The innkeeper cut her off, his gaze travelling from her filthy hem to her bruised face. "Especially not those running from something." "I have coin," she said, reaching for the small pouch hidden beneath her bodice. 3 copper pennies, all that remained of her former life. The innkeeper barked a laugh. "Not enough for trouble." His voice dropped. "Lower. I know a lord's runaway when I see one. Whatever man you're fleeing will have men searching. I'll not risk my establishment." She didn't argue. Arguments had never served her. Outside, the rain had intensified. Night had fallen completely now, a darkness thick enough to swallow her whole. She stumbled toward the village church, hoping for at least the meager shelter of its stone porch. As she crossed the square, a rider appeared at the village edge, tall, broad-shouldered, his armor glinting dully in the distant torchlight. She froze, a hunted creature sensing a predator's approach. The stable nestled at the village edge offered little more than walls against the wind, its roof missing half its thatch. Still, it was shelter. She crouched in the darkest corner, hidden behind a pile of mouldy hay, wrapped tight in her damp cloak. Outside, the rain hammered a relentless rhythm against what remained of the roof. Sleep refused to come. The stable's broken door creaked and swayed with each gust, letting in sharp blades of cold air. Her stomach cramped with hunger, a hollow ache she'd grown accustomed to during her flight. She pressed her fingers against the bruise on her face, wincing at its tenderness, a reminder of what waited if she were caught. Hours passed before the rain finally slowed to a drizzle. In the distance, raucous laughter spilled from the tavern as its door opened and closed. The sounds of men, their voices slurred with ale and mead. She pressed deeper into her corner. The voices grew closer. Lantern light flickered through the gaps in the stable wall. "Tavin swears he saw her come this way," a gruff voice said. "A fine-looking wench, despite the dirt. Runaway she is," another replied. "No decent woman travels alone. Probably warm enough under that cloak, eh?" 3 figures pushed through the broken door, ale-soaked and unsteady. Their lantern cast grotesque shadows against the walls as they advanced, searching. "There she is!" The tallest one spotted her, pointing with ale-bloated fingers. "Come out, pretty one! We've a room at the inn to share." She scrambled backward, until rotted boards stopped her retreat. "Please," she whispered. "I want no trouble." The men laughed. "Hear that, boys? No trouble." They moved closer. Just a bit of company on a cold night. The crunch of approaching hoofbeats silenced them. Heavy, deliberate steps that stopped just outside. A shadow darker than night filled the doorway, broad-shouldered, impossibly tall. "Aldrich!" one man gasped, the name escaping like a curse. The knight said nothing. He simply stood there, silent as death, the weak moonlight glinting dully off his armor. His face remained hidden beneath his helm, but she felt his gaze sweep the stable, settling on the three men. "We meant no harm," the tallest stammered, backing away. "Didn't know she was just leaving now." They scattered like frightened rabbits, giving the night a wide berth as they fled into the night. The night remained motionless. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, heart hammering. He hadn't come for the men, he'd come for her. His gauntleted hand rose slowly, beckoning her forward. His hand remained extended, an unspoken command. She hesitated, weighing certain danger against uncertain rescue. The knight didn't move, didn't speak, just waited with the patience of stone. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving behind a heavy silence broken only by the soft snorting of his destrier. She rose slowly, her legs stiff from cold and fear. What choice did she have? The village offered no sanctuary, and dawn would bring more dangers. At least this man had scattered her attackers without violence. She approached him cautiously, like a wounded fox might approach an offered morsel. When she reached the doorway, the knight turned wordlessly and walked to his horse. The massive black destrier eyed her warily, pawing the muddy ground. Its master placed his hands around her waist. She flinched at the contact and lifted her as if she weighed nothing, settling her on the saddle before mounting behind her. They rode in silence. The knight's armor pressed cold against her back, his breathing measured and even. She sat rigid, afraid to lean into him, afraid to pull away. His arms formed an iron cage around her as he held the reins, not touching her directly, yet allowing no possibility of escape. The road wound through dense forest, climbing steadily away from the village. Mist clung to the lower branches of ancient oaks, their twisted forms looming like spectres in the weak moonlight. Occasional breaks in the clouds cast brief silver illumination across the path before plunging them back into shadow. She studied his gauntleted hands on the reins. Old scars crossed the exposed skin at his wrists. A warrior's hands, marked by countless battles, yet they held the reins with surprising gentleness, guiding the massive warhorse around muddy pits and fallen branches with careful precision. Hours passed without a word between them. The rhythm of the horse's hooves became her heartbeat, steady and inevitable. Was she being led to sanctuary or a different kind of prison? The night's silence offered no answers. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the trees, the forest thinned. The path emerged onto a wind-swept ridge, and there it stood, a stone keep perched on the edge of a cliff, its dark towers stark against the lightening sky. No banners flew from its ramparts, no smoke rose from its chimneys. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time itself. The horse slowed as they approached the lowered drawbridge. The knight's breath caught slightly, the first sign of humanity she detected from him. His arm tightened almost imperceptibly around her waist as they crossed the threshold into his domain. The portcullis dropped behind them with the finality of a tomb. The inner bailey lay in half-ruin, stones scattered like broken teeth. Weeds pushed through cracked cobblestones, where knights had once trained. A single withered tree stood in the center, its bare branches reaching toward the grey sky like pleading fingers. The knight, Sir Aldrich, the villagers had called him, dismounted, in one fluid motion, then reached up to help her down. His gauntleted hands gripped her waist with impersonal efficiency. She slid to the ground, legs trembling from the long ride and lingering fear. For the first time, he removed his helm. She caught her breath. His face bore the map of old battles. A long scar bisected his left cheek from eye to jaw, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-grimace. Dark hair, streaked with premature grey, fell to his shoulders. But it was his eyes that held her, grey as winter fog, neither cruel nor kind, simply watchful. A bent figure shuffled from a doorway, an old man with a face as weathered as the keep's stones. He took the reins from Sir Aldrich without acknowledgement of the woman's presence. "Prepare a chamber," Sir Aldrich said. His voice was low, rough from disuse, like stone grinding against stone. The old servant nodded once and disappeared with the "And course," Sir Aldrich gestured for her to follow. They passed through a great hall where tapestries hung in tatters from the walls. A massive hearth stood cold and black with ash. Dust covered the long oak table. No servants bustled about. No hounds warmed themselves by the fire. The silence pressed against her ears like wool. They climbed a narrow staircase, their footsteps echoing through empty corridors. Shadows clung to corners where torch brackets stood empty. She passed a chamber door hanging from a single hinge, glimpsing a child's wooden horse overturned on the floor within. Sir Aldrich stopped before a heavy oak door. "You will sleep here," he said, pushing it open. The chamber was spare but clean. A narrow bed with fresh linens, a small table, a wooden chest. A fire had been hastily lit in the hearth, its weak flames the only warmth in the cold stone room. "Why have you brought me here?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her, those grey eyes revealing nothing. "Rest," he said, ignoring her question. "No one will trouble you within these walls." As he turned to leave, she glimpsed something unexpected. A small pouch of herbs hanging from a nail beside the door, dried lavender and rosemary bound with faded ribbon. A woman's touch in this barren place. The door closed behind him with the heavy finality of a tomb. Dawn crept through narrow windows, waking her from fitful sleep. No one came to attend her. No instructions were given. She found a basin of fresh water and a simple woolen dress laid at the foot of her bed, coarse but clean, replacing her tattered garments. She ventured cautiously into the corridor. The keep operated by unwritten rules, she discovered. Sir Aldrich broke his fast at precisely first light, alone at the head of the great hall's massive table. He trained in the courtyard until midday, sword flashing against invisible enemies. Afternoons he disappeared entirely. The night acknowledged her presence with only the briefest of nods. In the kitchen, she found the old servant stoking the fire. His clouded eyes assessed her silently. "I can help," she offered, reaching for a knife to cut the wrinkled vegetables beside the hearth. He hesitated, then nodded once. His gnarled hands worked methodically, revealing a peculiar grace. "How long have you served here?" she asked softly. "Since before," he replied, his voice like dry leaves rustling. Before what, he didn't say. Days passed. She learned the castles, rhythms, which floorboards creaked, which corridors Sir Aldrich avoided, which rooms stood perpetually locked. She swept dust from neglected corners, mended torn linens, coaxed life from the stunted kitchen garden, small tasks, but they anchored her in this strange new reality. The old servant, Gareth, she learned, grew marginally less taciturn. "He watches you," he mentioned one morning as they kneaded bread dough. "Sir Aldrich? When you're not looking. Same way he watches the Western Tower." She followed his gaze through the window to the tallest tower, its upper windows shuttered tight. Later, while gathering firewood in a storeroom, she discovered a small trunk pushed against the wall. Inside lay a child's wooden sword, lovingly carved with intricate patterns. Beside it, an embroidery hoop with unfinished work, delicate flowers frozen mid-bloom. the needle still threaded with faded blue silk. A shadow fell across her. Sir Aldrich stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. She expected rage at her intrusion, but instead saw something worse, raw pain flickering briefly in those grey eyes. "I was just—" she began. "The West Tower is forbidden," he interrupted, though she hadn't asked about it. "All other spaces are open to you." He turned to leave, then paused. "You've been tending the garden." It wasn't a question, but she nodded. "Good," he said simply, and was gone. The Western Tower cast long shadows as the sun descended. For days she had watched it from afar, the only place expressly forbidden to her. Its windows remained shuttered against light and prying eyes, the door at its base sealed with an iron lock larger than her hand. Each evening, Sir Aldrich disappeared for precisely 1 hour. She had marked the time by the candle's burn. Each evening, he emerged from that tower with eyes more haunted than before, moving with the careful gait of a man carrying an invisible burden. Today, she had found another piece of the puzzle. A silver bracelet sized for a child's wrist, engraved with the name Elaine. It lay forgotten behind a chest in the great hall, tarnished by years of neglect. The discovery kindled her curiosity into a flame that would not be extinguished. As dusk painted the stones crimson, she watched Sir Aldrich cross the courtyard toward the armory. His afternoon ritual would keep him occupied. She moved silently along the shadowed wall, heart hammering against her ribs. Just one glimpse, she told herself. One glimpse to quiet the questions that plagued her sleep. The tower door stood resolute, unyielding, but above one shutter hung askew, revealing a narrow window. A service staircase climbed the adjoining wall, treacherous with crumbling mortar but passable. She gathered her skirts and began to climb. The stone was cold beneath her fingers, with patches of green moss providing treacherous footholds. She didn't look down. From this height, the courtyard spread below, like a patchwork quilt of broken stones and struggling weeds. The window grew closer, with each carefully placed step. Finally, she reached it. The shutter creaked as she pushed it wider. Dust motes danced in the shaft of dying sunlight that pierced the gloom within. She leaned forward, peering into darkness. Chamber preserved in time. A small bed with covers still turned down. Wooden toys scattered as if their owner had just stepped away. A woman's dress laid carefully across a chair, a silver brush on the table beside it, and on the wall a portrait, Sir Aldrich younger, smiling, with a red-haired woman and small girl at his side. "So now you know." The voice came from below. "Sir." Aldrich stood in the courtyard, staring up at her, his face hard as the stone beneath her feet. She froze, guilt and fear mingling in her chest. Her foot slipped on the mossy stone. She clutched desperately at the window frame, but too late. She was falling, the ground rushing toward her with terrifying speed. Strong arms caught her before she struck the ground. Sir Aldrich stood rigid, her weight seeming nothing against his frame. For one breathless moment, she felt the thunder of his heart against her cheek. Then he set her down abruptly, his expression unreadable. "You will never go there again." His voice was low, tight with controlled fury. Or was it pain? She expected banishment. Instead, days of tense silence followed, broken only by the howl of winter winds as they swept across the keep. Snow came ferociously, burying the courtyard beneath drifts taller than a man. Ice sealed the gates and froze the well. The great halls, hearth became their sanctuary, the only space with warmth enough to ward off the killing cold. Gareth's joints pained him too greatly to manage the stairs. Sir Aldrich silently moved the old servant's pallet near the kitchen hearth, then brought his own furs to the great hall. She followed with her blankets, knowing isolation would mean death in such bitter cold. They existed in frigid silence beside the crackling fire. Sir Aldrich cleaned his sword methodically while she mended torn linens. The third night, as wind shrieked through the arrow slits, she noticed him wince as he lifted a log onto the fire. "You're injured," she said, the first word spoken between them since her fall. He didn't respond. She set aside her mending and approached cautiously. "Let me see." Surprisingly, he allowed her to examine his shoulder. An old wound had reopened, blood seeping through his linen shirt. She gathered herbs from her stores and heated water. "The battle at Thornwick Crossing," he said unexpectedly as she cleaned the wound. "An axe, 7 years past. It never healed." "And properly," she observed, her fingers gentle against his scarred flesh. "Some things never do." The silence that followed felt different. Not a wall between them, but a bridge not yet crossed. "The portrait in the tower," she ventured. "Your family?" His jaw tightened. She expected his withdrawal, but instead, "My wife, my daughter." "Elaine," she whispered, remembering the bracelet. He looked at her sharply, then gave a single nod. Later, as snow whispered against the stones, he studied her face in the firelight. "Your bruises," he said, gesturing to her cheek where fading purple still marked her skin. "Who?" She stared into the flames. "The man I was promised to, a lord with land and title, and cruel hands." "He searches for you still?" She nodded, fear coiling in her stomach. "Let him come," Sir Aldrich said, adding another log to the fire. The flames illuminated his scarred face, his eyes reflecting determination rather than the emptiness she'd grown accustomed to. Let him try. Spring thaw broke winter's siege. Snow retreated, revealing mud and stone beneath. The woman found herself humming as she gathered early herbs from the kitchen garden, a small contentment she hadn't known possible. The horn's blast shattered the morning quiet. A rider approached across the drawbridge, his blue and gold livery bright against the dreary landscape. A royal herald, the king's emblem flashed on his tabard as he dismounted in the courtyard. She retreated to the shadows of the kitchen doorway, heart hammering. Sir Aldrich emerged from the armory, his stance wary as he greeted the visitor. "Sir Aldrich of Ravencliff," the herald announced with practiced formality. "I bring word from His Majesty's court and from Lord Edmund Blackwell, the King's trusted adviser." The name struck her like a physical blow. Edmund, her betrothed. She pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a sound. The herald continued, unrolling a parchment. "Lord Blackwell seeks his betrothed, Lady Catherine of Hollowmere, who fled before their wedding ceremony. She is described as dark of hair, slight of frame, with a small scar beneath her right eye." Her fingers traced the mark unconsciously. Catherine, the name she had discarded like a snake, sheds unwanted skin. "Lord Blackwell offers 50 gold crowns for information leading to her return. Her father, Baron Hollowmere, has declared her mad, with grief following her mother's death, unfit to make decisions for herself." Sir Aldrich's face betrayed nothing. "And what business is this of mine? Reports place a woman matching her description in your company, Sir Knight. You were seen taking her from Blackthorn Village." She could see the tightening of Sir Aldrich's jaw, the subtle shift of his stance, a warrior preparing for battle. "I harbour no nobleman's daughter," he said evenly, "only a serving woman who assists my household." The herald's gaze darted toward the kitchen where she stood half-concealed. "Lord Blackwell will arrive within a fortnight to search these lands himself. The king grants him this right." "The king grants many rights to those in favour," Sir Aldrich replied, "but even the king's writ stops at a knight's threshold without cause." After the herald departed, she found Sir Aldrich staring from the battlements. She approached slowly. "Catherine," he said, testing the name without looking at her. "Not any more," she whispered. His hand covered hers on the cold stone. "Then who are you?" For the first time in months, she considered the question. "Whoever I choose to be." The key lay heavy in her palm, small, iron, blackened with age. "Gareth." had pressed it into her hand without a word before departing to gather supplies from the village. With Sir Aldric gone hunting, the keep stood empty save for her and its ghosts. She shouldn't. She had promised. Yet Lord Edmund would arrive within days, and Sir Aldric's secret stood between them like a wall she couldn't scale. If he was to risk everything for her, didn't she deserve to know why he lived as a ghost himself? The tower door creaked open at the key's touch. Dust motes swirled in the shaft of light from the small window she had peered through weeks before. The air hung, still, preserved like the memories it contained. She climbed the narrow stairs. The chamber above remained just as she had glimpsed it, frozen in time, waiting for occupants who would never return. She stepped carefully across the threshold, feeling like an intruder in a shrine. Here was the small bed with its faded blanket, the wooden toys scattered on the floor. A tiny dress hung from a peg, its embroidered hem unfinished. A woman's silver brush still held strands of auburn hair. The portrait watched her, Sir Aldric smiling, his face unmarred by the scar that now bisected his cheek. Beside him, a woman, with kind eyes, held a laughing child. A second door led to another chamber. Here, the preservation ended abruptly. Blackened beams jutted from collapsed walls. The ceiling had partially fallen in. Everything, bed, tapestries, furnishings, was charred beyond recognition. Only one corner remained untouched, where a writing desk held a half-finished letter. She lifted the parchment gently. The flowing script spoke across years. My dearest, the winter grows harsh, but Elaine's cough improves. We keep the fire burning day and night. The fire. Understanding bloomed like blood from a wound. You couldn't stay away. She turned. Sir Aldric stood in the doorway, his face terrible in its stillness. I'm sorry, she whispered. They burned while I hunted, he said, voice hollow. The hearth fire, the winds. By the time I returned... His fist clenched against the doorframe. I could hear them calling. She moved toward him, parchment trembling, in her hand. You couldn't have known. I should have been here. Rage and grief warred in his voice. Just as you believe you should have fought harder against your betrothed. The recognition startled her, how well he understood her own unspoken guilt. We survive, she said softly. That's all we can do. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw no walls between them, only shared pain, recognized and acknowledged. Dawn broke with hoofbeats. From the battlements she watched them emerge from the mist, a dozen mounted men led by a figure in black velvet. Lord Edmund Blackwell. Even at this distance she recognized the rigid set of his shoulders, the calculated precision of his movements. Cold sweat beaded along her spine. He's here, she whispered as Sir Aldric joined her. Sir Aldric's hand rested on the hilt of his sword. 3 against 12. Poor odds for them. She glanced at him, surprised by the grim humor in his voice. Gareth appeared behind them, carrying a crossbow despite his age. Lord Edmund's voice carried across the courtyard. Sir Aldric of Ravencliff, I come by the king's authority to reclaim what is mine. Surrender the Lady Catherine, and you shall face no consequences. Sir Aldric's laugh was harsh. There is no Lady Catherine here, Lord Blackwell, only a free woman who chooses her own path. Her former betrothed removed his riding gloves with deliberate slowness. I see your madness matches the tales. Very well. He signaled to his men. Burn the outbuildings, smoke them out. Arrows arced through the air, flaming tips embedding in the stable roof. Smoke billowed upward, grey against the pale sky. Sir Aldric turned to her. There's a passage beneath the eastern wall. Take Gareth and go. She shook her head. I will not run again. This is not your fight, he insisted. It is precisely my fight. She took the crossbow from Gareth's hands, and I choose to stand. For an instant, something like pride flickered in Sir Aldric's eyes. Then he nodded once. The gateway is their weakness. We hold there. As Edmund's men battered the outer gate, she and Sir Aldric positioned themselves behind the inner barricade. The acrid smell of smoke filled the air. Wood splintered as the attackers broke through. The first defense. "If we fall," she said quietly, "I want you to know my true name. Not Catherine, not the nameless woman you found. Before all that, I was Eleanor." His eyes never left the gate, but his hand found hers for one brief moment. "Eleanor," he repeated, the name a promise between them. The inner gate shuddered under the assault. Sir Aldric drew his sword. She raised the crossbow. "Together," he said. The gate burst open. Blood and smoke stained the great hall. Tapestries smouldered against stone walls. The ancient table lay splintered where men had fallen across it. Sunlight pierced through the shattered windows, illuminating dust and ash that swirled like spirits finally set free. Eleanor knelt beside Lord Edmund, watching life drain from the man who had once owned her future. His fine velvet was soaked, crimson, where Sir Aldric's blade had found its mark. His men had fled or fallen. Only he remained, gasping shallow breaths that bubbled red at his lips. "You were mine," he whispered, reaching for her with trembling fingers. "My Catherine." She moved beyond his reach. "I was never yours, and Catherine died the first time you raised your hand to her." Sir Aldric stood nearby, bloodied but unbowed. Old wounds had reopened in the fight. New ones marked his arms, yet his eyes remained clear and steady on her face. Edmund's laugh dissolved into a wet cough. "He cannot protect you. The king will hear of this treason." "Tell him then," she said, rising to her feet. "But you'll need to survive first." The dying lord's eyes widened with understanding. They would offer no aid, no mercy. His fingers clawed weakly at the floor. "You were nothing before me, a minor lord's forgotten daughter." "And now I am Eleanor," she said, the name feeling right on her tongue. "Not Catherine of Hollowmere, not your betrothed, just Eleanor who chooses her own path." "And what path is that?" Blood flecked his lips as he sneered. She moved to Sir Aldric's side, her hand finding his. "This one." Edmund's eyes dulled as he slipped away, taking the last chains of her past with him. Later, as Gareth tended their wounds before the partially restored hearth, Sir Aldric spoke quietly. "You called me by my title, never my name." She paused in, bandaging his arm. "I never knew what else to call you. Before I was Sir Aldric the Feared, I was Aldric Thorn." His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle despite their calluses. "Son of a stone mason, husband, father, things I had forgotten until you came." "Aldric," she said, testing the name without its title. "Eleanor," he answered, the corner of his mouth lifting in a smile she had never seen before. In the dying light, surrounded by the ruins of battle, they sat closer than necessary, not touching save where his hand still rested against hers, but the space between them had transformed, no longer a void, but a bridge. Spring unfurled across the land like a banner of rebirth. Apple blossoms dotted the newly planted orchard, where charred ruins had once stood. The keep's walls, scrubbed of battle stains, rose proudly against the blue sky. Workers called to one another as they laid fresh stones where the gate had splintered. Eleanor knelt in the courtyard, coaxing tender seedlings into the soil that had once been barren. Around her, life stirred. A kitchen maid singing as she beat rugs against the wall, two village children chasing each other between newly built workbenches, a blacksmith hammering rhythm into the day. She paused, hands deep in the warm earth, and watched a rider approach across the drawbridge. Even at a distance, she recognized Aldric's straight-backed posture, the relaxed confidence with which he guided his horse. No longer the grim, silent knight who had first brought her here, but not quite the man from the portrait either. Someone anew, forged in the fire of their shared battles. "The western villages have pledged loyalty," he announced as he dismounted. "The king has recognized our claim to these lands." "Our claim?" She stood, brushing soil from her skirts. His eyes softened. "If you'll share it." That evening, they walked the battlements together. Below, Gareth directed a group of workers repairing the main hall's roof. The old servant had found new purpose as steward, his bent frame somehow straighter these days. "Sometimes I expect to wake and find this all vanished," she admitted, watching twilight paint the hills gold, like the morning mist when the sun rises. Aldrich's hand found hers, calloused palm against her soil-stained fingers. "I felt that way, after the fire, that nothing permanent could exist again, and now I believe in stone and timber again, in foundations that hold." His gaze held hers, "in futures that can be built." Later, beneath a canvas of stars, Eleanor descended to the courtyard garden. There, sheltered by newly raised walls, she planted the last seedling, a sprig of lavender saved from the herb pouch she had carried during her flight. Its scent rose from crushed leaves, sweet and sharp. She felt his presence before she saw him. Aldrich knelt beside her, his fingers working the soil with surprising gentleness. "What grows here?" he asked. "Hope," she replied, "and memory. Both have their place." Above them, a banner snapped in the breeze, newly sown, bearing not the fearsome raven of Ravencliff, but a simple design, a tower with an open door, framed by sprigs of lavender. Not a prison, not a tomb, home.